It was a chaotic win, but a win nevertheless for the Phoenix Suns as their superstar backcourt tandem led them to victory. 129-109 over the Dallas Mavericks, taking a 2-0 series lead. We'll talk about how those two got it done and what the Suns did right to get another win on today's episode of Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a contributor at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day. If you are listening, if you are watching, well, you found us and you know we're free. So the best way to support the show, the best way to get the show is to hit that subscribe button, that follow button on whatever podcast platform you are listening on, as well as on our growing YouTube channel. We're not going anywhere. We're going to have the bonus episode for you after Game 3 on Friday night. We're going to have the Game 4 recap on Sunday. This thing is not slowing down. The Suns are not slowing down. So get on board and let's have some fun. 109 for the Mavs, 129 for the Suns. A 20-point victory. We'll break it all down. It was a chaotic game. It was a lot of fouls. It was a lot of foul trouble, especially in the first 3 quarters. But at the end of the day, the Suns stars got it done. And that's where I want to start. So a lot of the conversation, understandably, this whole series has centered on Luka Doncic, right? I mean, he is the sun around which the Mavericks orbit. He's their everything. He needs to play at an elite level for them to win games. He played 44 minutes in Game 1. He was 45 points in Game 1, and he dominates the ball, right? He got a little bit the Mavs got a little bit less out of him here in Game 2, only 35 points. Talk about his performance in more specifics as we go. Jalen Brunson, 9 points, continues to be quiet. And then on the other side, you have 58 combined between Booker and Paul, 12 assists to just 5 turnovers for those two guys. And especially in that second half, the two of them just playing off of one another, just trading haymakers. It's like all of a sudden the boxing ring, a twin appeared for one of the boxers. And that's what the second half of this game became. But even deeper than that, this game was a reminder, and I think a wake-up call probably for Dallas and Dallas fans, that your best players not only have to play both ends, be able to hold up offensively and defensively across 35 plus minutes for multiple playoff games in a row when the game plan is stacked against you and all the rest, but you also have to do it within the flow of what's going on. And I think those two things are what is missing from the Mavericks, and most importantly missing from Luka's game right now. And it's not to pick on him because, again, he had an efficient 35. But there's a few things here that I think are hurting the Mavs, frankly. And I'll get into the Suns' awesomeness side of this too, because that's what you guys are here for. But Dallas is not getting that flow going whatsoever right now. That was what made them so dangerous in that first round and what allowed them to beat the Jazz without Luka for 3 of the games, right? I mean, Jalen Brunson was averaging 28 points per game in that first round. He had 9 tonight, just 3 of 12. Luka Doncic had 7 turnovers. So yes, he had 7 assists. Yes, he scored an efficient 35 points, but he had 7 turnovers, and he's also not getting to the free throw line. This is something that I talked about in the preview we did with Locked On Mavs, where I said those 3 games in the first round when Luka came back, he was, I think, less than 5 free throw attempts. During the regular season, he was at 7 or 8 per game. You should think that would even go up during the playoffs because he's playing more minutes, but it's not doing that, at least in this round. So, yes, if you take a lot of shots because you have the ball in your hands at all times and you're a great, elite, generationally talented player, yeah, you're going to make 13 to 22. You're going to score 35. But it doesn't feel like it's lifting the Mavericks as a team right now. And Dallas only scored 109 points. They only had an offensive rating of 113 compared to 134 for the Suns. And then you flip things around on the defensive end, and it's even worse. Luka Doncic was targeted over and over and over and over and over in this game, especially in the second half when Chris Paul went into kill mode a little bit more. He just targeted Luka repeatedly. Run a screen, run a pick and roll, get the switch. I believe Kellen Olson had it that Chris scored or assisted on 19 straight points at one point in the fourth quarter, was almost 5 minutes of action. So he is a player that just is being asked to do too much, I think, at the end of the day right now. Chris was able to go at him because even though it's not a great advantage, I mean, trying to sort of shoot over the top of Luka or drive past him, there's a lot of better options on the Mavs roster. I mean, we saw the Suns do the same thing to Jalen Brunson at times, including in this game where right away from the jump, it was actually Brunson who they targeted, with making him be the helper at the basket in the pick and roll if Mikal Bridges is in the corner, or using Bridges directly just to attack off of a closeout or shoot over the top of Brunson. They got the first 5 points of the game were Bridges attacking that matchup. So it's not like the Mavs don't provide other places to go, but you could just tell the Suns were thinking, we know Luka is their best offensive option. He does everything for them. So one of the ways we can stop him from doing that is by making him guard, and he's also one of their weaker defenders. So that's probably going to go well for us. That's going to be a double whammy for the Suns, and that's exactly what it was. The thing about this Suns backcourt, aside from all of the special things they can do on offense, is once again, they do it together. They do it in the flow of a system, and they do it on both ends. So to just take this full circle, Chris Paul is not somebody. We saw the inverse happening in the first half and throughout the first two games here, where Luka is trying to get Chris Paul on a switch. It doesn't go all that well. We've seen Chris get a couple of steals in those situations. He understands how to move his feet. He can at least hold up in the post enough. He knows how to do so without fouling. All that stuff. Devin Booker, I want to read this stat, was he held Brunson to 0.22 points per possession on 20 possessions. So he only had, I don't even know what that ends up being, a handful of points. And obviously, on top of that, Booker had 30 himself. So Booker and Paul do it on both ends. They do it together. They do it within a system. Right now, Luka is doing it being producing, but he's not doing any of that within any sort of flow. He's not elevating Brunson. Brunson is not seemingly able to get himself going because it's a bad matchup for him. He's smaller than every player on the court right now. And as a result, they're tired and they're frustrated. And what that ends up meaning too is they're not very good at defense and they are getting exploited. And when your two best players are getting exploited on defense, you're just not going to win games. And when your two best players are not only being exploited, but being targeted, well, that's when things get ugly. That's when you get a 20-point loss in the playoffs and lose control of the series a little bit. And that's what happened to the Mavericks tonight. The Suns are just relentless. They are relentless. But they also had to do it with some chaos around them. Fouls galore in this game. At one point, 3 or 4 straight offensive fouls for the Suns in the second quarter. So how did they focus? How do they overcome that? We'll talk about it in a second. First, so guys, today's show brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your stats and info to fuel and inform your betting all year long. Find the latest sports developments, analysis, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs, the MLB season in full swing, and this weekend's run to the Roses with the Kentucky Derby back. That's right. One familiar face not around for the Derby this year, but of course, one of the most fun things to bet on that there is. Let's go to NBA odds right now. Talked about this on Locked On NBA, actually, on Wednesday's show. Lakers' next head coach. The favorite is Darvin Ham over with Milwaukee. But I feel like Mark Jackson and Mike Brown are both really interesting candidates here because they're recognizable names. They're guys that LeBron knows. Plus 700 for Mark Jackson, plus 1,000 for Mike Brown. We're all going to laugh at who the Lakers end up hiring, and we're going to laugh if they're not successful next season. Why don't you put some money on it? Make it even more satisfying. Head to the website today, guys. That's betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I'm going to go back through my notes here on the foul situation. Chaos. What are we going to call this? Chaos feels like too small of a word. If you were in the building, you could feel it. If you were watching on TV, you probably changed the channel. But the bottom line is this game was a little bit off the rails. In the second quarter, well, let me start in the first quarter. So Brunson was the first guy to pick up 2 fouls. That was at the 6:07 mark. Then you have Cam Johnson picking up his third foul with 32 seconds left in the first quarter. You have both JaVale and DeAndre Ayton picking up their third fouls in the second quarter around the 4 or 5 minute mark, which means that we see Ish Wainwright in place of Cam Johnson. We see Bismack Biyombo in place of the 2 centers. So rotations are screwed up. You look at the box score, and DeAndre Ayton only played 18 minutes. JaVale McGee only played 10 minutes. A lot of bizarre stuff as a result of the fouls. Then in the third quarter, you get a flagrant 1 from DeAndre Ayton, which I thought was a little bit egregious. I get that the criteria for a flagrant 1 is just excessive force, excessive physicality with the play, not unnecessary. That's the flagrant 2, but even excessive, it felt incidental with Ayton getting a hit to Dwight Powell's head. Maybe he was just a little bit, lost control of his physicality a little bit. I get that, but with how many calls they were already making, you'd think that they were, I guess that's a sign that they were trying to keep things in check. I don't know. It didn't feel like a flagrant 1, but it happened. And that set off just a chain reaction. So that became Ayton's 4th foul. McGee picks up his 4th foul at the 9-minute mark. Dorian Finney-Smith, 4th foul at the 8:44 mark. Powell's 4th foul at the 8-minute-and-30 mark. JaVale McGee's 5th foul at the 4-minute-58-second mark, which was a crazy one as well. You had an incredible Suns defensive possession, and then it ends up getting to a corner 3 by Reggie Bullock. He lets the shot go as the buzzer is going, but then in the wing right next to where Bullock was, all of a sudden you see JaVale McGee on the floor. What the heck is going on? Well, what happened is he basically tackled a shooter on a closeout, and somehow that ended up being a foul on him, which probably should have been. But on top of that, the 3 by Bullock counted. So because the referee blew the whistle late, that allowed Bullock to get the shot off before the whistle, which then meant that it was a made 3, and it was a foul. And because the Mavs were obviously in the bonus by that point, they got 2 free throws for it. Very bizarre. I've never seen something like that. It seemed like the refs being late to call the foul is what ended up rewarding the Mavericks. Bizarre stuff, but the Suns held in there. Luka went to the bench at the end of the third quarter. The Suns won those minutes 5-2. They actually lost the 5 or so minutes that Luka sat in the first half. And then everything gets better by the fourth quarter. Monty actually sticks with Bismack Biyombo to start the fourth. For like the first 6 whole minutes of the fourth, Biyombo is actually in the game. I think Monty's like, hey, none of these other guys are able to get any rhythm. Nobody's exactly having a great game at the center spot at that point. So let's just stick with Biyombo. He had a block at the basket. He was holding up on switches against Luka. He was getting his hand on rebounds. He was finishing in the paint on the roll. Why go away from it? And so you see a lot of Bismack Biyombo time. He's actually tied with Ayton for most minutes at center tonight with 18. And I would say actually all of that was, if I can remember correctly, all of that was in the second half. So that all said, the fourth quarter comes around. Biyombo is the one exception, but basically things get back to normal. And you have, again, Chris Paul just going into complete attack mode. We'll talk about how the Suns have been able to maintain their offensive efficiency when it comes to the playoffs in the last segment, because I think that deserves just some shine in and of itself. But keeping the focus with the physicality is an interesting question, and it's something that I think the Suns got much better at this season. If you listened to me during the regular season at all, it was something I pointed out a lot, especially when it comes to Devin Booker. It's not that they lost their swagger, they lost their cockiness, they lost their confidence or any of that stuff. I think that they just realized, hey, arguing with referees or letting that get in our heads, that's just not the way that this is going to go well, right? And so they just channeled it better. There was that stretch in the second half of the season where Booker would, almost every single night seem to have some sort of problem with a fan, cursing guys out, yelling stuff into the crowd, finding somebody on the opposing bench. And that's really how the team was able to channel its frustration or its energy or whatever you want to call it, rather than, bickering with officials or, letting calls get into their heads, going at it with the opposing team or things like that. So, they were ready for this situation because of the growth that they've had in that just emotional focus. It's not like it was ever costing them games in the past, but you could tell it affected them, and it doesn't as much anymore. But they also were ready based on what we saw last series. Jay Crowder pointed out post-game that they all, as a team in the locker room, were kind of laughing at like, hey, we've had this before, right? And he actually pointed to Game 6, the closeout game of the previous series against the Pelicans, which was obviously in New Orleans, where you had that McCollum flagrant with the elbow to Cam Johnson. You had just some nonsense, right? Some moments very similar to this one where it was just, the refs kind of taking too much of control of the game, neither team being able to just handle their business, and it just devolves. We've all seen that in basketball, and this game very much had that. And so Jay basically said, like, even just last round they experienced it, let alone all the playoff games last year. There were a lot in that Clippers series, in my opinion, that felt this way. You had late in the Valley-Oop game, I think is a perfect example. It wasn't like the refs were calling too much, but it was, if you remember, the reason the Suns were able to get back into that one is because they had the poise to continue to execute while Paul George missed his free throws. The Clippers had no business losing that game 2 when the Valley-Oop happened in the conference finals last year. They did it because Paul George missed free throws, and then they were able to make some shots and then obviously get that out of bounds play. So that to me is another example. The Suns are able to just get the job done. And I also think there's something to be said for, credit where credit is due, that not many of these guys actually got into significant foul trouble when it was all said and done. You didn't have guys fouling out in this game. Yes, JaVale McGee got his 5th in the third quarter. That was probably the worst example. But at the end of the day, he played 10 minutes. What's his max in minutes? Like 20, 15? So he's kind of out there he probably more than anybody else has the green light to give up those fouls. I don't know how many of them were intentional or whatever, but he can play loose and not worry. So the bottom line, Ayton sat out because Monty wanted to ride Biyombo, but you could have easily seen Ayton play the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, and he ended up leaving at the end of the fourth quarter. If he plays the whole fourth quarter, his minutes are probably in the high 20s, and that feels pretty normal. Everyone else basically played their normal amount of minutes. I mean, Cam Johnson was a little bit low. Obviously, Ayton was a little bit low. That's about it, though. You had 36 for Paul, 36 for Booker, 39 for Bridges, who wasn't even in foul trouble. Paul wasn't either. So that type of resilience was good to see as well. Then you flip things over to the Mavericks side. Dorian Finney-Smith only ends up playing 20 minutes, just never able to really get into a rhythm. The Mavericks had to just adjust their defensive scheme because they knew they couldn't count on Smith being out there, and basically just don't really go to him all that much. You had Dwight Powell only playing 13 minutes. He didn't grab a single rebound. Another guy who just failed to make an impact on the game because of the foul situation. And so key players for the Mavs very much affected, whereas not so much for the Suns. I think that's important too. And I just think this is another area where the experience, the savvy, the IQ of the Suns, it just shined through. I just trust this team who went to the finals last year, who has guys like Crowder, Paul, McGee on their team who just can just not be bothered by it, more than I trust the Mavericks team, who's in their first ever second round, who barely has any, if any, rotation players over the age of 30. It's just a very different situation, and it's another area where experience is shining through, helping the Suns get the job done. The other area we saw experience and savvy and IQ help the Suns was their efficiency. They broke a franchise record for field goal percentage in this game, and they also were second in NBA history in another efficiency category. We'll talk about what that was and why it happened in 1 second. First, though, guys, today's show is brought to you as well by Rock Auto. Oh, boy. I think I said this on the show. I got in a car accident on the way to Game 5 of the first round series. I'm totally fine, but trust me when I say the car situation can be a nightmare. If I do end up getting to keep my old car, if they're able to repair it, I know I put myself in a bad situation. That thing is going to be on its last legs. I'm going to need to get value when I'm doing repairs. On the other hand, if I end up needing to get a new car, I don't want to put that in somebody's hands that I don't trust. A very brand new car is not the kind of thing you want to leave up to chance or that you want to overspend on. The initial bit of maintenance should just be smooth. And I know when I go to Rock Auto, it will be, because they've been doing this for 20 years. And what I mean by this is serving do-it-yourself customers online as a family business. That's the model. That's the value. That's the great thing you get when you go to Rock Auto. Save time and money, of course, but also get good service, get fast service, get delivered parts that you need right to your door when you need them. Go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, guys, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Last but not least at all, the Suns dominated in the efficiency category. They looked as good as we've ever seen them look over the 2 years that Chris Paul has been here from an offensive standpoint. And they did it in the second round of the playoff series. It very much is reminiscent of the second round last year. Devin Booker was asked about that a little bit, and he said, look, seeds don't tell the whole story when it comes to matchups. And the playoffs, as we all know, are very matchup dependent. Sometimes a team just catches the wrong opponent. And that seems to be what we've seen from the Mavericks so far this series. And it's what happened with the Nuggets in the second round last year. But that doesn't take away from what the Suns were able to do. To do this, even with all the chaos of the fouls, even going up against an opponent as great as Luka Doncic, they were just perfect. I mean, they were as close to perfect as an NBA team can be in this game. And I mentioned they broke a franchise record. They didn't just narrowly break this franchise record. Coming into Game 2 tonight, the previous field goal percentage high for a Suns playoff game, it might have just been any game, but I'm pretty sure it was a playoff game because I'm sure it might have been higher in a regular season game in the past. 61%. Okay. Tonight, it wasn't 61.1. It was 64.5%. They shredded. They just destroyed that record. And then on top of that, the other NBA history record that I was teasing heading into this segment came from Tim McMahon via ESPN Stats and Info. He tweeted, the Suns tonight had a 75.7% true shooting percentage. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that stat, that's going to factor in 2s, 3s, and free throws. And it's going to value each of them accordingly. 1.2 points, 3 points. Did you make the most valuable shots at a good enough rate to where what was your overall level of efficiency based on the shots that you did take? Okay. 75.7%. The second highest all time in the history of the NBA playoffs. Now we know teams are taking more threes. That inflates true shooting percentage because those shots are worth more. If you make a pretty good percentage of your threes, well, then you're going to have a good true shooting percentage. And the Suns tonight made 52% of their threes. So it's not exactly a surprising thing when you just look at it that they did so well. But what's surprising is the second highest all time in the history of the league. You know, you're talking about the KD Warriors. You are talking about the Rockets with Chris Paul and James Harden. A lot of spectacular offenses have come through the league in recent years, and the Suns were the second best ever. But better yet, even than that, what's hilarious and awesome is that the best ever was the Clippers in the bubble in Game 5. Their opponent, that was the Dallas Mavericks. These very same Dallas Mavericks have now given up numbers 1 and 2 on that list. That's not exactly something they will brag about in their season review, but it happened, and the Suns did that to them. Suns just owned this game on offense, especially in the second half. You have another one from Dave McMenamin, the fourth time this postseason that Chris Paul has scored 10-plus points in the fourth quarter. When the Suns decide to lock in late in these games, there is nothing to be done. That's it. There's nothing to be done. And they reminded us of that. And I think if you're wondering how they're able to do this, which was almost a question that, you know, everybody who came through the news conference post game was asked, like, just what is going on here, right? How is this still happening, basically, from the Chris Paul standpoint? But I think the whole team deserves credit. And the place that I come down on it is that these guys, and I would even put the defensive performance up there too, that they only allowed 49 points from Dallas. So the offense was record breaking, but the defense is very, very good too. And the thing that's the through line, the thing that I would use to explain all of this, they're geniuses. Like, the numbers almost take away from that because it can feel so like, oh, they broke the system, or wow, you know, Devin Booker is just a cheat code and this and that. Maybe all that's true. It probably is. But they're brilliant. Like, they are so smart. And when you see them just surgically dismantle their opponents, that's what really shines through to me. You see them going at mismatches on defense. What I've been talking about with Brunson, with Luka, with Bertans, with all these guys, they find it, they attack it, and they do it the right way. It might take 3 passes. It might take a couple of screens, but they're going to exploit the exact thing that the opponent knows is exploitable and that they're trying to prevent the Suns from exploiting. It happens anyway, and they get great offense out of it. And then you flip things around on defense. I mean, it's hard to overstate how well the Mavericks offense was doing against the Jazz. And of course, you can make the case like, hey, Utah's defense was garbage. That team is falling apart. It's the end of an era for that team. They were just broken. Sure, that's true, but it's still a fact that this team, the Mavericks, were just rocking that Jazz defense. Like, this Mavericks offense was one of the best units on any side of the ball in the first round. They were getting open shot after open shot, and the Suns come in and they just say, nope, it's not going to happen against us. So yes, the Mavericks have made their threes, relatively speaking, in this series. At least their best shooters have. They've been pretty efficient, all things considered. They've gotten monster performances from Luka, but the Suns are just going to play all out. They're going to make the Mavericks feel them on every possession. They're going to make the Mavs, not get the comfortable shots that they want. You saw Maxi Kleber hot in game 1. Those shots weren't there for him in game 2. The closeouts came harder. Jalen Brunson was rocking in the first round. He's been nowhere to be found in round number 2 here. So Whether it's offense or defense, this team is made up of just genius basketball players, and they're flying around. They're playing hard. They want this badly. And what you get is a game that feels like one of the best they've played all year, even though it's the second round, even though it's game 2 of the second round, even though there were fouls and all the rest. They do it. They just get the job done. They find and execute. They play hard. And you all know that. You all know that. It's not special. It's not great analysis to say that, but it's special stuff we're seeing. And sometimes it's as simple as that. All right, guys, I will be back tomorrow with a crossover show for you with Nick Engstadt of Locked On Mavs, previewing Game 3. Then we will have a recap of Game 3 with Aaron Edwards, who will be back for his weekly visit. And then we'll have a Mother's Day episode to close out the week. Coincidentally, Game 4, right in the smack dab middle of Mother's Day. I hope all of you guys will be watching it with your moms, rooting for a Suns win, of course. And that's the plan for the rest of the week. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the follow button if you're listening on any podcast platform. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today, tomorrow, the rest of the week, and beyond. Now go make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on the other series going on around the NBA in the playoffs.